Fellow Toastmasters, who is your favorite storyteller? Is it an aunt or uncle or grandparent, perhaps? Maybe it's Dominic or Robert or Sherry. There are a lot of great storytellers in here. But who are the greatest storytellers of all time? Homer told of adventure and men of war. Sophocles and Tolstoy told of people in trouble. Terence and Mark Twain told humorous stories, while Faulkner and Dickens told melodramatic ones. Plutarch and Livy told history, while Hans Christian Andersen and Aesop told fairy tales and fables. But who is the greatest of these? My favorite is Zane Grey. Zane wrote fantastic descriptions of the Western landscape. He captured the romance of the society of tumbleweed and sage and leather and cactus. But really, he did not dig too deep into the psychology of his characters. About all you got was something like, Joe thought his horse was thirsty. Not really too deep. But William Shakespeare told every kind of story with depth and insight. Comedy, tragedy, romance, history, melodrama, fairy tales, and sometimes he combined them all. He wrote with equal brilliance about violent shipwrecks, country flowers, blood-soaked battlefields, innocent children, evil witches, mad kings and their crumbling empires, and star-crossed lovers. He did so combining perfect storytelling and flawless poetry, bringing the two together like the words and music of a song. When I was 19 years old, and in my first literature class in a community college, an instructor gave me the complete works of William Shakespeare, and I read it to impress her, and it did. But it was 2 years of very, very hard work. I understood a tiny bit, and I retained even less, because what I did not realize is that Shakespeare never intended for his plays to be read. Excuse me? He never intended for his plays to be read? That's right. He wrote his plays solely to be used as scripts by his fellow actors and not for general publication. You see, Shakespeare never explains anything. He never tells us what his characters are thinking, what they're wearing, what they look like, what kind of house they live in, what kind of car they drive. And all this makes tremendous demands on the reader. But you see, Shakespeare's intended audience was not one person sitting in a chair reading a book, but rather a large, excited audience, packed into a theater, waiting for his words to come alive, accompanied by the blaring of trumpets, the unfurling of huge banners in brilliant costumes. Now, if you're paying attention and are a little bit curious, King Lear, he drove a Suburban. Shylock, a Hyundai. Who remembers Caliban, from The Tempest, the noble savage. He rode a Harley Davidson. Shakespeare created an atmosphere of willing make-believe, what we today call suspended disbelief. And this enabled him to conquer time and space in his plays. For example, Antony and Cleopatra covers a span of 12 years and journeys through the ancient world from Egypt to Rome. There are 42 changes of scene in total, but it is Shakespeare's poetry and the imagination of the audience, and not props or special effects, that creates Pompey's fleet of warships, or the Great Pyramids, or Cleopatra's spectacular and lavish palace. Shakespeare was an actor long before he was a playwright, and he knew the demands and limitations and the possibilities of the stage. He also knew human nature, and he knew how to wring every drop of suspense and tension possible. And that's why, even after 400 years, his words have not diminished in any of their power. Our actors and actresses today still long to portray Shakespearean heroes or villains. But for all of Shakespeare's brilliance and genius, he was not considered an intellectual in his day. He received only a modest public education, and both of his parents were illiterate. Shakespeare's father worked as a tanner, not a tenor like Placido Domingo, but a tanner who works with animal hides. Shakespeare never forgot his humble origins, and he always considered himself first and foremost a working man of the theater, as he spent his entire life acting, writing, and producing. After his death, two of his closest associates, Henry Cummings and John Randall, they gathered all of Shakespeare's plays in a single book known as the First Folio. And this was published in 1623. In the preface, they wrote, "We have collected and published the plays of William Shakespeare, not for fame nor profit, but solely to keep the memory of so worthy a friend and fellow alive. I believe if the two men were alive today, they would be astonished, because not only is the memory of Shakespeare alive, but he is as meaningful and popular and relevant as ever in the hearts and minds of critics, artists, and readers everywhere around the world. He still stands alone as our greatest storyteller." Mr. Toastmaster.